Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I haven't done a talking head video in a long time, but I thought it would be a good idea to do one so that I could address an age-old question. What is a subway? So if you're wondering why I think there's even a point in discussing this, let me explain. It's actually a very valid question, but if you live in Canada, it might be even more interesting. Now, I've got into many Twitter debates in my day, and if you follow me on Twitter, you can see them. It's not all debates. Sometimes I post some more relaxing content on there as well. But one thing I found odd in Toronto was when someone dismissed the current government's plan of taking what would have been a tram line and putting it underground as not being a real subway. Beyond the fact that I think that this is more of a political statement than an actually insightful discussion about transit, there is a good question raised here. What does a system have to have, or what does a system have to be to qualify as a subway? Now, in Canada, we have any matter of systems, from the mostly above ground but entirely grade-separated SkyTrain and O-Train, to the LRT systems in Alberta, which are fast and frequent, but which have some grade crossings, to the largely underground trams of the Eglinton Crosstown, the entirely underground Montreal Metro, or the mixed Toronto subway, some sections above ground, some sections below ground, and with trains that look the most subway-like. For me, to answer the question of whether something qualifies as a subway, we need to actually distill what subways are and what subway characteristics are. And what better system to distill those characteristics from than from New York, the system that is literally the subway. When we look at the New York system, we see that it is fully grade separated, but that trains do run above ground on the surface and in trenches. So it seems that the fact that the system is grade separated is more important than the system being at a certain elevation relative to the ground. Now, to be fair, the New York City subway system does have fairly large trains and express services, but if we look at some other iconic subway or metro systems like the London Underground or the Paris Metro, we realize that trains don't actually have to be all that large and you don't need express services everywhere to still qualify as a subway or a metro. Metros and subways are the same in most people's minds, so I'm treating them as the same thing. I would say what becomes clear is that the fundamentals are fast frequent service and grade separation, and what you might realize is that those two things might be one and the same. It's also worth pointing out that the platform height across these systems varies, so platform height isn't necessarily all that important. So by these measures, if a train system is frequent and grade separated, then it's probably a subway. That means from Vancouver to Ottawa, from Montreal to Toronto, these systems are all really fundamentally subways. Indeed, even the underground trams of Toronto's Line 5 will be subway trains while they're operating in the subway way. But this is where I want you to think a bit more abstractly. Yes, we're going there. We're going to be abstract. I love platform screen doors, and not just because they improve the safety of your stations and allow you to air condition and heat them much better than if you didn't have them, but also because they can turn transit into a black box. I'm not sure if this is something people thought about when platform screen doors were first introduced, but it's something I think about a lot. Once you put platform screen doors up, it becomes very hard for the average person to differentiate any two grade-separated rapid transit lines, or to differentiate any line from a subway system. Now, I can attest to this firsthand. When taking a trip through the Seattle airport when I was a kid, possibly back from New York City, I remember my mom referring to the underground people mover. The Seattle airport has a people mover. It's underground. It has platform screen doors, as the subway. You should also note that since there's platform screen doors up, it is very hard to see the trains. This is something that's almost universally true with platform screen doors. They often have some form of tint, and if you're not paying attention for the exact moment when the train shoots by, it's really hard to tell what the train actually looks like. And so what does all of this show? Well, when people see platform screen door, they step through it into a nicely lit box, and the box takes them from station to station quickly, and it shows up at the stations frequently. They're probably going to think of it as a subway. And fundamentally, I guess that is the idea of what a subway is, and that's probably how we should look at it. What I'm getting at here is that even if people like me complain that the Eglinton Crosstown trains aren't good for subway service, when they're operating grade separated in a tunnel, people are probably going to think of them as subway trains. The only thing that might make people think twice is seeing how high the track bed is, basically the fact that the tracks are just slightly below the platform, and actually seeing the trains and being like, that looks like a Toronto streetcar. If that weren't something that people saw and noticed, then it would be no different than the A train running through New York City. And if there were platform screen doors, which I imagine most transit systems in the world will have in the future, well, people really probably wouldn't notice. I think it's sometimes really helpful to think about transit this way. Of course, the vehicle is of interest to planners and transit enthusiasts for obvious reasons, because you have to think about things like capacity when you're planning and designing a system. But when things are running well, people really just care about speed, frequency, and reliability. The vehicle is basically totally irrelevant to people riding transit that aren't transit enthusiasts, and let's be honest, that's the vast majority of people riding transit. What this means is that even if your system doesn't use the best vehicles, or the like, if it's fast, frequent, and as long as it has sufficient capacity, well then it's as good as a subway. The amazing thing about this is that for a smaller city like Copenhagen or Vancouver, who both essentially have subway systems, their subway systems are basically just as good for them as the New York subway system is for New York. The trains don't have to be massive, they just have to have enough room for the number of people who are taking the service. And the ridership experience is no different than if you used a New York subway. In fact, some people would probably argue it's better because these systems being automated are more frequent. And of course, larger cities don't even need larger trains as long as the demand isn't necessarily there for a particular route. If you're doing a circumferential line around, let's say, Chicago, you could probably get away with 3-car trains. And if you had platform screen doors, no one would ever even know that they were 3-car trains unless they were a transit enthusiast. All of this is just a roundabout way of saying the fundamentals of a good urban rail system are frequency, speed, reliability, and yes, high-grade separation, as well as some space for riders. As long as you do that and maintain that, little else matters. And while buses aren't as fast as trains, if you can do the same thing for buses, you'd be amazed just how powerful your bus system could even be. The vehicle does not always matter, and it rarely matters for riders.